All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? This is the adoption class, part of the adoption track for Discipline Looks Different. So I hope you're in the right class. My name's Lee Boger. My wife Kathy. We serve as elder and elder's wife in Indianapolis at a church there. I've been a disciple for, 35, 36 years, something like that. So I'm one of the dinosaurs that you can come to, or how was it in the prehistoric age, and I can tell you all about it. We do have a handout up here, but I'd prefer you pick it up after class. Almost all the material, and actually more material, is in the handout than what we're showing. So I think it benefits you more if you can focus and try to look at the big picture of what we want to share today. First thing we're going to do, we're going to look at a couple different things. I want to ask a couple questions referring to children that you have at your home. How many of you have an adopted child at home right now? Okay. How many of them have a boy? Okay. And biological children at home. Okay, it's good to know. We're hoping to get through everything and have time for Q&A at the end, but if we don't, since it's the last class, we're going to stick around if you have any one-on-one questions you want to give us. We're going to break the class up into two different pieces. The first piece is understanding your child. You know, a lot of times with discipline, we're so focused on the behavior, the things that they're doing that we just cannot allow to continue. But if you don't understand the underlying reason of where that behavior is coming from, then the discipline isn't as effective, what we found. The second part is we'll get into a little bit of discipline specifics, but we're going to spend half the time just talking about what these kids are dealing with, and it just gives you a different perspective. So hopefully that'll be helpful for you. First, I want to introduce our family. That's us at Christmas last year. I won't tell you the story where the 9-foot tree fell and the chaos that created. But our daughter on the left there is Natalie. She's 25 and graduated from Purdue University and is going to go back there in another year for a nursing degree. The daughter on the far right is Mariah. She's our youngest, and she is also at Purdue in Indiana. She's in her last year. They're both involved in the ministry there at Purdue, my youngest in the campus and my oldest in the young professional ministry. They love it there. They're actually rooming together, which is kind of cool for them. My son, we adopted him. His name's David, at the age of 4 from Romania. So this is 1999, when the doors were open for that country. They're no longer open, from what I've heard. He's 22 now. His best friends are in the church, and we enjoy having them all over. We're empty nesting, kinda, so we can talk about that another time. That's the first picture we got for David. His birth name was Kuya Florine, so we gave him the name David Florine. We kept the middle name, and that's a very common name over there in Romania. That was our first picture of him when we had the choice of were we going to go forward with the adoption. Let's look at James chapter 1, that scripture that a lot of us are familiar with. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. So, you know, if you've taken an orphan into your home, God takes note of that. It's not it doesn't always feel pure and faultless when you have discipline issues that you're trying to help them with. But from God's perspective, He takes note and accepts what you've embraced and what you're experiencing. And the angle I want to come from today is when you took that orphan into your home, they're no longer an orphan, right? Physically, they are in your home. But I want to present to you a perspective that they're still an orphan emotionally. they're still an orphan from their emotional development. You know, when you look at a 3-month-old, you don't expect them to walk, right? Because you know physically they're just not developed yet. And the same thing with a toddler, more likely, unless they're a prodigy, they're not going to speak the native language fluently. They're not ready yet. And you know that you don't even have that expectation. And if you understand emotionally where these kids are coming from, it can change your expectations so that the discipline can be, one, more effective and not as frustrating to you as the parent. So to look at understanding your child, I want to look at 3 different lenses that we're going to briefly look through. It's almost like looking at the child through a different magnifying glass. How many of you are familiar with John and Karen Louie's work, Good Enough Parenting? You've read it, seen it? Well, we're going to look under there, look through that lens just for a moment, because it's, I think, pretty important for these kids. You know, that book talks about the different emotional, core emotional needs. There's like 4 or 5 of them. And one of them is connection and acceptance. And that core emotional need is the greatest deficit in a lot of these adopted children. And I want to read a couple things they mentioned here. In order to meet this need, this is a need you want to meet in every kid you have, right? Every child you have in your home. They say in their book, John and Karen Louie, real connection with our children is when the sharing of emotions takes place in both directions, parents to children and children to parents, such that a healthy, affectionate bond and an empathetic understanding develop between the 2 sides, and they both feel positive at an emotional level. Meeting this core emotional need cannot be done if parents insist on staying in rational or logical mode. I can relate to that. I'm an engineer. Okay? If we're going to connect with our children and help them feel accepted, we must interact with them on an emotional level. And they quoted a guy named John Gottman, who has devoted his work to this area, and he calls it emotion coaching. And it led him to conclude that the more a child is emotionally connected with his parents, the more likely the child is to accept his parents' values. When the level of connection is high, the ability of the parents to influence them is also high. Now, the reverse is true, right? If the connection's low, it doesn't matter what discipline technique you use. They're just not going to get it. So we've got to be able to connect as well as discipline and training. Well, how do you connect? We're not going to tell you how to do that. That's in the other class that's going on right now with Bruce and Jen Radel, staying connected to your child. So make sure you listen to their audio, because that piece is just as important as this piece. So some of the life traps that if you go back and read from this book, there's mistrust. Now, if many of you looked at the I Choose Us marriage part of their teaching, they talk about the life traps. They get into those life traps are the things that cause us to be triggered emotionally, and you get a lot of negative emotions, anger in yourself, sadness, hurt feelings, things like that. And most of us have 1 or 2 of those life traps that we battle and try to manage day to day. If this core emotional need is not met, that person has up to 6 life traps. 6 of them. Mistrust, defectiveness and shame, emotional deprivation, social isolation, emotional inhibition. You know, sometimes these kids don't cry. And failure. And these are some of the tapes that go through their heads. This is true for anybody who doesn't have connection and acceptance as a core emotional need met. But it's especially true with a lot of these children. Listen to some of these tapes that go through their head. according to John and Karen's research, I'm not good enough. Anyone who truly knows me could not love me. I have failed, and I'll fail again in the future. I'm different from other people, and I don't fit in. I cannot expect others to care about what I need. And when you look at your child from this lens, from these core emotional needs that aren't met, how does that play into having your discipline be effective? Well, the takeaway that I have taken from that and we've used in our parenting is I have to connect with my son. It's not an option. I can't do that when he's emotionally charged and saying hurtful things, but during the other times, the times when everybody's calm, and I've got to connect with him. I've got to go overboard to try to meet that gaping hole that's in his heart because of what he's been through. And when you do that, it really does help your discipline. It makes all the difference in the world. Well, let's look at the second lens. In the psychology and psychiatry world, they understand this core emotional need that John and Carrie Louie identified. They call it RAD, reactive attachment disorder. And I love the picture of this kid. Somebody has left him. They got in the boat and they left him. My son was with his birth parents for 18 months. And in Romania, medicine's socialized. So if you can't take care of your kid, you could take him to the hospital and say, I'm kind of done here. And they take him and put him in the orphanage system, which I've heard is more of a foster care system. So what impact would it have on a toddler to just one day, he's not seeing his mom and dad again, ever? What wound does that create inside? And that doesn't just go away with even years of love and attention. It's this ongoing need that's there. A lot of times we're going to look under this lens here to understand from psychology and psychiatry, what have they seen? Let's look at that for a second. Because everything that happened to those children, and sometimes it's not in an adoption situation, but it could just be in the home, the kids don't understand. They're just too young. And how do they react? Well, they lose trust in others, and the world becomes unsafe. And to a kid, that's just devastating. So let's look at some of the common signs. Control and anger issues. That's going to be there in a lot of these children. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear that these are general trends that we're sharing, and my wife and I have discussed these things with 15 to 20 adoptive families. And these issues are there in a lot of them. Now, occasionally there is a kid, my wife's brother's adopted as an infant, and he didn't seem to show a lot of these, but a lot of the kids do. So control and anger issues. They will go to great lengths to remain in control and to avoid feeling helpless. Oftentimes this will come out as disobedient, defiant, even argumentative. Lying and manipulation are common. But the underlying cause is they're trying to maintain control. They don't trust you enough for you to control things. And when things are out of sorts and they feel that, it can come out very, very quickly. Anger can come out, tantrums or acting out, or it could be more passive aggressive, like delayed obedience. They'll walk to their room slowly. They'll pick up their toys very, very slowly. Or my wife and I call it poking, where they poke you. They just do things that kind of get under your skin. And one day I asked my son, I said, when everything was calm, and I said, I noticed you do that with your mom. Why do you do that? And he goes, oh, it's just for fun. I just want to see how she reacts. Oh, okay. So when you get this stuff happening more frequently, what does it create in us? Anger, right? Well, why do you think I wrote this book? But what about your anger? Yeah, that came from a lot of the stuff that came out in us. I had anger triggers I never knew I had. So but the study I did about how God helps us with our anger changed my life. It changed how we parented. It changed my relationship with my wife. I'm a pretty low-key, emotionally stable, not much rattles me. But boy, this kind of stuff that we're talking about that came out, I was different at times. And it was hard to control that. Another one is, you'd love when siblings hurt each other, or maybe the adopted child will hurt a parent. You'd like there to be remorse. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Hug, reconciliation, everything's good, right? A lot of these children, that's hard for them. They don't show remorse, guilt after behaving badly. Sometimes that affects relationships with siblings. It did in our house. The other thing we notice is they oftentimes have poor social skills and difficulty in school. And part of the thing that's going on is inside of them, they don't have good problem-solving skills. And they don't have good cause and effect reasoning. Sometimes there's learning disabilities or they're delayed. My son was in an orphanage for 2.5 years. Well, he came out, he was 4 years old, but developmentally he was probably about a 2-year-old. So he was behind from the get-go. And that doesn't help the esteem when you feel like you don't fit in and you're not doing as well as your two sisters who are really smart, or the neighborhood kid, So it adds to them. And how does this affect your discipline? The effects that you're trying to train in them? Well, what we saw was they had to learn the same lesson over and over and over because they're not connecting this cause and effect. Oh, I shouldn't do that anymore because this bad thing happened. They don't get that. So when you have to teach a kid again and again the same lesson over and over, it makes you, it starts to feel like, well, they're being, just stubborn and et cetera, and you get more and more frustrated. But a lot of it is they're just not wired that way. Not yet. The older the child is when you adopt, the more these characteristics are displayed. Now the problem with the psychology and psychiatry world, when they look at RAD and how to help this, they don't have an answer from what I've seen. Their general take is try to provide the child with a safe and stable living condition and have some positive interactions between family members. And that's about it from what I've seen and talking to some parents who have been through some of those classes. Well, let's look at one other lens. Well, before we do, let me ask, tell you what the benefit is when you understand it from this lens. How does that help your discipline? Well, I'll tell you how it helped us. A lot of times when they are triggered, they got 6 life traps. They're going to get triggered more often than other kids. Those emotions and triggers and reactions, they come out unpleasant sometimes, they're loud sometimes, they're hurtful sometimes. But those reactions and emotions, they're just stronger than their bond with you. That bond is difficult to have, and so when they feel something strong, they're going to react, and they don't care who it hurts. And so it helped us, at least it helped me, to not take it so personally. It's not a personal attack on me. And so that allowed me to have a lot more patience, more compassion, I'm not going to react back with anger. I manage my anger. And it's amazing how quickly his anger subsided when I didn't react. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. Well, let's look at the third lens. This is the lens of trauma. Now, I want to take you into the social work world for a minute. You know, the people in Family Protection Services, you know, they deal with a lot of bad stuff, right? Drug abuse. And a lot of these kids in this trauma world, they hear things they shouldn't be hearing. They see things they should never be seeing. They're not old enough to process that. Or maybe they're part of an accident, or they see somebody die, or drug issues and drinking, and there's abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, watching somebody beat on their mother. You know, how's a young kid process that? How do they just deal with that? They're supposed to be in a safe environment. Well, in this world, I researched it a little bit. What happens with a lot of these children, their survival skills during and through trauma, they basically do three things. They shut off their emotions. They are convinced, I just need to take care of myself and don't trust anyone. That's how they react. So I thought, well, are some of these adopted kids, make sure I'm clear, not all of them come under this umbrella, but some of them do. So what I did was I took this, this chart is from that social work area. There's 20 things listed here, you know, hopelessness, nightmares, self-hatred, panic attacks, substance abuse, self-destructive behaviors, loss, irritability, things like, you can read them for yourself. But I went to an adoptive family who had a 3-year-old. And I said, take a look at this list and tell me which one of those do you see in your child. And that's what they said. 4 out of the 20 they saw. Pretty much, you know, day by day, pretty consistently. Well, then I went to another adopted family, and my wife helped me with this. They had an 11-year-old. Now, I don't know when they were adopted. They were adopted earlier, and they're now 11. Is that right?
Yeah, it's age 11.
Okay, so adopted earlier, now they're at age 11. Okay, which one of these do you see in your 11-year-old? 7 out of 20. Okay, well, let's go to a third family. They adopted this child at 4. Now they're 18. Which ones do you see in them? 9 out of 20. And what's that mean? What's that mean to us as parents? Well, as a child gets older, some of them, the effects of what they went through in their early years comes out maybe even a little more. But if you know that going in, if you know that's some tendencies, it's more helpful because you know what to expect. You're almost preconditioned in a sense. And there was a great book by one of the adopted families we talked to. They recommended this book, and I personally have not read it yet. The Connected Child by Karen Purvis. But it's particularly for describing the effects of trauma on the brain in layman's terms, so we can understand it. You know, you don't have to be a neuroscientist to understand it. She tries to describe it, and her quote here that you see on the right, I thought was perfect. She says, "It is not you against this child, it is you and this child against this child's history. It's not a personal attack on you." You know, well, why is that important to us? Well, talking to a lot of these families, even though the child went through all this trauma, it also has an effect on you as a parent. And I want to read a quote from a social worker who, this is her job, day in, day out. She's helping adopted families, and she's helping them, and she's in the social work world where there's trauma with some of these even foster kids. And here's what she says. Many parents describe feeling burned out, chronically overwhelmed or fatigued. It can become increasingly difficult to maintain compassion and a desire to nurture, while simultaneously feeling guilty that you feel that way. We may shut down and withdraw or be on edge a lot of the time. There can be hopelessness, anxiety, and seemingly unending frustration. Now that's for some of these kids. I've talked to 3 other elder families who have an adopted child that have gone through the exact same things we have. These are good-hearted people. They know how to parent kids. And yet, nobody's got an answer that works for everybody. And it's because some of these wounds that are so deep inside the kid. In fact, in the social work world, you as a parent, if you're exposed to the child's trauma over an extended period of time, means there's a high likelihood that you as a parent will be living with secondary trauma. You yourself become a victim at some level. Emotionally, the way it affects you. And I think we can attest to that. Now, how's this benefit your discipline? Knowing this, knowing trauma and everything we've learned about it, here's the hope. In the social work world, there is a lot of research. There's tons of information that you can glean from, that you can go to. And some of the things that they're learning, that they're teaching parents with traumatized kids in their system, Family Protection Services system, some of them are showing promise of how to reach these kids. Now, I haven't personally dove into it, but I've just skimmed the surface, and they talk about therapeutic parenting, and they talk about connected therapeutic relational parenting. They have terms out there that seem to offer some hope. So I wanted you to at least understand it from that standpoint. What we want to do at the moment, I want to share with you this need to connect. I want to read a scripture in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, because a lot of times that's very, very difficult. If the child doesn't connect back, especially if you have biological children, several of you raised your hand that you do, there is a natural bond that you have with your biological children. And with the adopted child, sometimes it's not there. It's more of a struggle. And I got a lot of hope from this passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, because Paul had that with the Corinthian church. And it gave me, I don't know, when just being in this room, you're with people who, I get it, Well, Paul gets it, and it can be very encouraging to us. Starting in verse 11. We have spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and opened wide our hearts to you. We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. As a fair exchange, I speak as to my children. Open wide your hearts also. Now, I love the Holman Christian Standard Bible. Let me read to you how they translated it. We have spoken openly to you, Corinthians. Our heart has been opened wide. You are not limited by us, but you are limited by your own affections. I speak as to my children. As a proper response, you should also be open to us. So he tells them, you're limited by your own affections. And that's exactly what some of these adopted children are. They're limited by what's happened to them on the inside. The Greek word for that word, affections, it literally means the bowels or the intestines, your guts, okay? And Jews and Hebrews, they viewed that as the seat of tender affections. That's where kindness comes from. That's where compassion comes from. And the Greek word for limited or withholding or restrained, it means anguish or crowd into a narrow space. You know that passage in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 8, we're hard pressed on every side but not crushed. That's the same word, hard pressed, just pressed down. You take their emotions and you compress it and you shove it down deep inside of these children. That doesn't easily come out. And then in chapter 7, in verse 2, I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. And I want you to picture this. As I read this, just picture your own relationship with your adopted child. Please open your hearts to us. We have not done wrong to anyone, nor led anyone astray, nor taken advantage of anyone. I'm not saying this to condemn you. I said before that you are in our hearts, and we live or die together with you. I have the highest confidence in you. I take great pride in you. You have greatly encouraged me and make me happy despite all our troubles. And man, I tell you, when I read that, that's exactly how I felt. I believe so much in my son and what he's able to do and accomplish. The love is there. When the troubles and difficulties come, and you're not connecting, and I feel everything that he shared there. This this trust and connection that we're talking about, your biological children, they have that. It comes very naturally for them. For the adopted children, it is very different. For them, it's a coping mechanism that they learned very early in life in order to survive emotionally. It doesn't easily go away with time or even years of love and attention. And when you can understand where they're coming from, it changes your discipline. It changes you. So that's why it's been important to us. My wife's going to come up here and share a little bit about some other resources that can keep you encouraged.
Well, this stuff is really heavy, but I love this conference, how we can be together, we can rub shoulders with other people who get it, and we can talk and get helpful suggestions. These are some other ways that you can get help. Disciples Today, you're probably familiar with. There's actually a section called Forever Families, if you didn't know, and there's great articles. Every month there's a new one, sometimes written by adoptive kids, sometimes by parents, and they're all archived, so you can go back and read them all. It's kind of tricky to find, but you have to go all the way down the page. Those are like two different screens, so kind of scroll all the way down to where it says Kingdom Kids, and you'll find it there. There's also a Forever Families link, Facebook link or page that's for the ICOC churches, and it's just for members, so that you can feel vulnerable on that page, and people will be getting advice and different things, just a way to connect with people, even get contact information, which is great. That's what we need. We need each other. Also, I'm an adoption coach. It's my passion, and that's why I became an adoption coach. And so this is my website. It's embracingchildadoption.com, and I have some cards up here that if you'd like to have, you may. Also, I want to make the most of this conference, and so I'm offering half-price sessions while we're here. So I blocked out my dinner tonight and tomorrow. If you have the time and would like to meet with me, I'd be happy to do that. This Indianapolis, we're really excited that we have a support group, and that's something you could probably start in your city. This is one of our meetings. We do different things. We meet 4 times a year, and sometimes we'll talk about different things. The last time we met was just a week ago, and we had a pool party, and all the kids were there, and we just had fun and had a lot of food. So that's really great because I don't know if you could tell, there's different ages in there. Some like us have kids in their 20s, some have babies that they've just adopted, so it's great to rub shoulders, and also the kids get to see other adopted kids too.
All right. You hanging in there?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's look at the second part here, discipline specifics. Because I do want to give you some practicals, but I want to preface it that there's not one method that works for everybody, depending on the child, what they've been through. And it also depends on your own temperament and your personality. You have triggers too, right? So one of the things let me read off a couple things that happen when that natural trusting bond with parents, when it's not there, and we've covered a couple of these, the child has more tendency to lie, anger, manipulation. Again, it's the control. Traditional parenting methods often don't work. Consequences have no lasting impact. At least and this is coming from some of the research, from discussing with different families. That's consistent across a lot of people's experiences. The reward and punishment system, where they connect, I shouldn't do that anymore. I didn't get to have the dessert, that just, sometimes that doesn't work because they don't have that good cause and effect reasoning. It doesn't encourage positive behavior at times. Oftentimes because they just simply react. So some of the things we're going to share here are specifically for kids who, as you're trying to help them, you're trying to train them, you're trying to discipline, they seem to become more disrespectful, more obnoxious, more hurtful, even abusive verbally. They can say hurtful things. So these are some techniques to address that type of behavior. So keep that in mind as we share a couple of these. First one is identify the trigger. Remember these 6 life traps. When a child is triggered, their problem-solving skills, remember, that's not their strengths. They just can't think through how to solve a problem. Those tend to deteriorate, and it's hard for them to access and remember what they're supposed to do when they're triggered, so they just simply react. And it's usually in a behavior that's not acceptable, and they get in trouble at school, or they get in trouble at home. But here's the way that some of the conversations that you can have, maybe not in the moment when emotions are high, but at another time. So, these are questions you can talk about. So, when you don't have enough money to go to the dance, the rules about not stealing don't apply to you anymore? Here's another one. How come when I tell you you can't do something, it's okay for you to call me names? The purpose is to help the child begin processing their own thinking and reaction to help them solve the problem, and so that other people don't get hurt. Here's another specific. Use direct statements and disconnect. This means to cut off communication once the child begins to be disrespectful, obnoxious, or abusive. You tell the child exactly how you want him or her to behave, and then you turn and you walk away. If you continue the conversation, asking for an explanation, or you start giving him a lecture, that gives him power. A lot of these, when a child is in this state, they feel the most invigorating or the most powerful when they're arguing with you. So if you continue to argue with them, you're giving them power. And you got to take that power away. So disconnecting forces a child to deal with the problem and the discomfort, or forces him to deal with his behavior rather than dragging you into it. And my wife's going to share in just a second about some of this. If the child argues behind your back, let's say you disconnect, you turn and you walk away, and the child argues behind your back, it's critical that you don't respond. If it's a disrespectful comment, still walk away, because that leaves the child powerless. They don't have an audience anymore. And it's almost like gas on a fire. You've taken away the gas. With simple, honest, direct statements, you address the behavior, not the emotion or the attitude. And my wife's going to come up and share, because we've experienced this ourselves.
I will say, just to add to that, that we do circle back and talk about the disrespect later when it's calm. It's not that we ignore it. And our son David has given me permission to share these things with you. When he was in middle school, back to the identifying the trigger, some days he would come home from school and just be out of sorts and be disrespectful and act out. And we finally figured out by finding out his trigger that it was on the days that he was bullied at school that he came home and was acting that way. And he didn't even make the connection. But once we figured that out, he'd come home from school and have a really, kind of bad interaction with me. I'd say, so let's sit down, let's talk about what happened at school today. Did anybody say anything mean to you? And usually that came out. And so that kind of helped us to know, why he was feeling that way. Also, he had counseling for a couple of years, and the counselor really helped us to identify that when he's overwhelmed, David in particular couldn't process things. If I was giving him, 5 things to do, you need to brush your teeth, and it was too much for him, his particular personality. And so once I knew that, I was like, okay, I'm going to give him 2 things to do. He'll do that, come back. And this was when he was older, so just knowing that. And also for him, first thing in the morning, that's just didn't fly for him. So I had to I'm all ready to go and go through the day. And remember, you need to do this. And I have to just remember, I can't do that with him. And we had kind of this thing set up with the counselor that he would put up his hand like this. He was probably in high school at the time. Put up his hand when he was feeling it was too much. And that would give me the signal. I needed to learn to respect that and not barge through it. But then I would know, okay, this isn't the time. Let's come back to this later. So those things were really helpful. And then also with the direct statements, David was one that would just do the poking, like Lee said, and he would sometimes say, mommy, 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 mommy. I mean, this was in middle school. And we'd tell him, why are you doing that? It's just irritating more than anything. But then he would go on to say mean things, and he knew what would trigger us. He'd say, well, like, if there was a God, and he was just saying things because we'd go, oh, what are you saying? Or you Christians, this and that. And we're going, oh, man. But what we learned from that is what Lee said, and this worked perfectly. It was hard to do at first, is the walking away. But I would explain it. I would say, David, right now you're saying mean things to me and disrespectful things. I need for you to respect me, and since you're not, I'm going to leave. And I would turn and walk away. There were several times where he would follow me. One time I had to go in the bathroom and lock the door. And it was so tempting when he would say something to just argue back, because the disrespect, I just wanted to jump on that. But it really did shut him down, like Lee said, when you just walk away.
And it's amazing how those interactions, it helped change him, because you're forcing him to deal with him. Now, we would love for him to just tell me what you're feeling. Are you sad? Are you lonely? Or something happened at school? But they don't know how to do that. It's just not natural for them. They've learned the world's not safe. I'm going to protect myself. I need to control and manipulate, and I'm just going to, he won't let anybody in. And so you have to manage it and be one step ahead of them, keeping your cool. You're calm and collected. I'm not getting angry. I'm not letting you drag me in. And it really helps. Use consequences to get honesty. Since lying is, at least it was an issue in our house, you don't give lying more power by making it just a moral issue and a lengthy discussion. You just keep it simple. You lied, here's the consequence. And sometimes we had to pray because you don't have the whole story. You don't have the whole truth. You can never really get to the truth. And so we'd pray, God, you just got to make it clear. And we've got stories we could tell where God just took a spotlight, and made it really clear. And that really helped. Have the consequences fit the crime. Well, if you hurt your sister, then you need to go serve her. You need to clean her room. Now if you tell us the truth, here's the consequences. If you lie about it, the consequences are going to be twice. So it was fit to the crime. We generally did not take away relationship time. We wanted to keep relationship time there and not use that as a punitive method. Choose your battles. Parents don't have to attend every argument they're invited to. You have the choice. You can just walk away. For the arguments that you do choose the battle, you should have a position that's explainable, like safety. This is where it's at because we want you to be safe. The child's going to feel the most calm, in control, and powerful when you sit there and argue with them. So don't give them that. Choose your battles. Stop the show. Talk to the hand, right? If you're in a car and they start behaving in this manner, you pull over to a safe area and you stop the car and you say, look, you either stop what you're doing or we're not going anywhere and we're going home. If you're in a store or a public area, you take them outside, away from the event, and you repeat the same message. And if they test you, then you go home. You have to take away their perceived power.
This example is from another family, but it's really good. Their 3-year-old in the foster care system was biting, and that can tend to be common. And a lot of times, this child had trauma in his background, and even the negative attention is what he was wanting. So that biting would give the negative attention because everybody go, you bit somebody. But what they decided to do, the parents, was really brilliant. They decided to give the attention to the victim, whoever this child bit, and said, I'm so sorry that you hurt. And they all went to them, and he's just standing here on the side. And in fact, they went as far as saying, I think you need a popsicle. You need a popsicle. And of course, the kid who bit didn't get a popsicle. So it's things like that, creative things.
That's right.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, it worked.
Yeah.
The last one here is be self-aware with your communication. And this is from studies for decades. 50 to 60% of your communication is the look on your face. 30 to 40% is your tone. And 10% is from what you say. We think that the great point we're making or how firm we make it, all they see is Dad's mad at me. Dad doesn't like me because of the way he's looking at me. They're not even connected on what's the lesson here. So how much more important is, and that's this book was part of that. My kids would see my tone, the frustration, because I'm a low-key guy. That frustration would build, and I'd have that glare. My eyebrows would go down, and the tone. And my youngest, she's much more sensitive than my oldest, and she'd get scared. Dad, you scare me. she wouldn't even hear what, what was going on. We did a quick survey from some adoptive families as we close up here. You should use corporal punishment with caution. Corporal punishment, spanking. Some of the parenting tools that you use with biological children may have worked great. It did with us. It may not with them. It may create more issues because you don't know the wound. We don't know sometimes what they've been through. As I wrap up, there's no easy answer or proven technique. What it comes down to is the child's choice, their choice to trust again, believe that they have a safe environment, and give their heart rests entirely with them and the miraculous work that God can do in their hearts. As much as we think it's up to us, the wound is so deep, it's really up to them. They have to choose to trust again. And that's hard. So when we open it up, that finishes, I think, what we wanted to share. We can open it up for a little Q&A. If you have any specific questions, you want to join me up here? Yeah.
The support group, was it Christians or did you just open it up? How did you find it?
We started it in our.
Repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was the support group, was it just Christians and how did we start it? It's just the people in our local congregation right now. We've had, I don't know if we've had any visitors. We probably haven't, because we really do get real when we have conversations, and I think it's just a safe place right now. For us, that's what we decided. And when somebody in our congregation just decided, hey, let's all get together. And because there's a number of us, she just started it, and it doesn't take much to plan. 4 times a year, someone will host it and say who's going to host the next one and what do you want to talk about. Are there certain topics that you want to discuss or different things?
And then the other question was on, you were mentioning about walking away, not engaging when you're angry. Have you guys seen any kind of negative effect on that? Like, do they feel in any way abandoned? Because I'm just kind of wrestling with that concept because I think
That's a good question.
when you tell them to walk away and leave them, if they feel already abandoned, and sometimes they feel like if you engage, not that we need to argue and fight back, but just is there any other way that they won't feel that we're leaving and distant from us?
Sure.
So kind of emotionally having the time out, and some kids might, I don't know, just saying, just
That's
how I
right.
feel.
Repeat the question.
That's a good question. The question was, when you walk away, what we were talking about walking away, does that lead the child to maybe feel more abandoned? I would say what happened with us was we made sure later that we surrounded him with love and affection, after he was done being disrespectful. So I hope the connection was made, I think it was with our son, that the walking away was because of the behavior, not because of who he is. We weren't walking away from him as in our relationship, it was his behavior. I don't know if that.
Yeah,
You said your son's 22 now. Like, where does it stand now? Is he still doing these things? My son's 14 and my daughter's 18. Both adopted.
It changed when he moved out. His relationship with us drastically changed. I mean, and we were
For the better.
for the better, yeah, for the good.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
And he was,
For the
what,
good.
19?
Yeah, he was 19 and he moved out because I don't know what it was, but like if somebody wants to flap their wings. I want to get out of the nest. I want to, I want my independence, but they're not ready for the independence. But he moved out. Our interactions, there was no more poking. There was no more disrespect. Now, sometimes we have some other issues that are there, but that changed quite a bit for the good after they moved out.
On the discipline, you keep doing that. She's starting 15, and everything you described is my life. So just keep working with that, even at 13 and going on upwards. We just put her in middle school. We're doing homeschool for a while. We realized she needs to get on with just dealing with life as it comes. and it's a
Yeah.
bit overwhelming right now, but we talk a lot. She's doing better when she went home, but the other issues are coming up.
Well, that's a good,
Good question.
yeah. So your question was, how does it stay the same
This discipline, do you keep doing it at the teen as they come into teens? How do you manage it?
from middle school into high school? And
Yeah, what does, do you keep up with the same discipline you've given you?
yeah, I mean, sometimes we get one area, it pops up in another. You know, it finds a way to express in a different way. They learn.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't do this, so I'll do this. You know, and so you have to stay. It's almost like a chess game in some ways. But once we got to high school, we actually took it to another level. We got counseling
Yeah.
for 2 years, and every week, and it was pretty much, we're doing this. But then we let it be his decision,
Okay.
and then he chose to continue doing it, and it really helped his relationship with his mom. A lot of the anger that we've seen in different families, the anger is directed toward the adoptive mom more than not all the time. But, so we did that, and then because of the academic struggles, she homeschooled him for a year, his junior year in high school, and things actually got worse that year.
With the discipline,
Yeah,
it
with
did.
the
It was the best thing to do academically, but yeah.
Yeah, she had to endure quite a bit from that. Yeah.
We have, we adopted our son, he was like 7 or 8, and we have biological sons, so they're both 15 right now. One's a freshman, one's a sophomore. One of the things that I keyed in on the most was we had major trust issues with him because the Seton line is like a second language. But I didn't really key in on a lot of that comes from his mistrust of us. So kind of 2 questions. One, I don't know how to delve into that, dealing with his mistrust for us, because why would he trust us? We love him, we're disciples, we treat him really well. And the second one is, I think dealing with, since they're the same age, both of our sons are the same age, is obviously he gets into trouble a lot more, so there's a lot more discipline even as a teenager. We're dealing with him wanting to go out right now, and trying to find where he's going, who he's with, how he's going to get there, make sure he's not taking an Uber, and he gets in trouble a lot. So like there's times where he'll get his cell phone taken away, electronics taken away, but his brother has his because he's not breaking trust and other issues, and dealing with that imbalance of one seems like he gets favored, why the other one, oh, you don't love me as much as I'm adopted, you know, type of thing.
Yeah.
No, it's because you
No, that's a good question. We can relate to that. The question is, the adopted child has a sibling, they're about the same age, but the adopted child gets in trouble more, so the sibling looks like they're favored, and it seems unfair. Right. You want to share, or I'll take
Go
it?
ahead. I mean, and I also asked about the trust issue.
Yeah, yeah, and how to build trust.
Yeah.
Is that the other question? Because that,
I've never really considered it.
yeah, it's, for me, it came down to the one-on-one times. Let's go get some chips at a Mexican restaurant. Let's just talk. You know, it's just, let's go to a movie together. It's that initiation. Make sure you get a handout if you want one. The other thing was during the calm moments, like we'll go to get a burger before a meal, before a movie, I mean. And while we're sitting eating the burger, I'd talk to him about some of those things. I said, you know, you've gotten your MP3 player taken away twice and your sister hasn't. Do you know why? No. Well, it's because you're having to learn the same lesson over and over and over and over, and she learned it and quit doing it. Do you know why that is? And he just sits there and thinks, so you got to just help them through the process. We can't assume that they're just going to process this themselves, because they can't. It doesn't work. Over and over, and do that for 4 or 5 years, and then come back and let's chat. Okay, I think that closes us out today. We'll stay here for a few minutes if you want to chat. We appreciate your time, and if anybody wants a free copy, you're welcome to this. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.